Hello, my friends, and welcome back today. We're still reading the book called The World According to Humphrey. This is Alexile 6. This is Alexile 670. So if that is Alexile that's close to what yours is, which I forgot to send them out last week, so I'll try to work on that today. Then you can take a reading counts on this when we're all finished. So chapter 2 is called Nightlife. Chapter 1 was about how Humphrey told us the story of how Miss Mac got him at the pet store, and then she left. So she must have been a substitute teacher for another teacher, and the teacher who came back was not excited about having Humphrey. And so he was telling us the story of how that went down. So this chapter is called Nightlife. For the rest of the day, I felt sad, sad, sad. You look sad, Humphrey, Golda Miranda said when she was cleaning my cage right before lunch. According to the chart Miss Mac had left, it was her turn to take care of me, thank goodness. Miranda was the best cage cleaner and never said yuck. She put on throwaway gloves, then cleaned my potty corner, changed my bedding, gave me fresh water, and finally, oh joy, gave me fresh grain, some lettuce, and mealworms. This will make you happy, she said, as she slipped me the special treat she brought from home, cauliflower. Naturally, Miranda had good taste. I promptly saved it in my cheek pouch until I could store it in my sleeping house. Hamsters like to stash food for the future. After my cage was taken care of, I felt well enough to observe Miss Brisbane more carefully. Now remember, Miss Brisbane was a teacher who came back. Now, Miss Mac was tall, wore bright glasses, short skirts, and high shoes. She wore bracelets that jingle-jangled. She spoke in a loud voice and waved her arms and walked around the room when she taught. Mrs. Brisbane, on the other hand, was short with gray hair. Short with short gray hair. She wore dark clothes and flat shoes, and she didn't jingle-jangle at all. She spoke in a voice that just loud enough to hear, and sat at her desk or stood at the chalkboard when she talked. No wonder I was feeling drowsy after lunch. All that nice food and all that soft talking. Is that all this hamster does? Sleep? She asked at one point when she glanced over at my cage. Well, he's ternal, replied Raise your hand, Heidi Hopper. Raise your hand, Heidi, said Mrs. Brisbane. What's ternal? You know, ternal. He sleeps during the day, said Heidi. I was wide awake now. Nocturnal, I squeaked. Hamsters are nocturnal. But remember, nobody can hear him because he squeaks. Oh, you mean nocturnal, said Mrs. Brisbane, almost if she had understood me. She turned and wrote the word on the board. Can anyone else name an animal that's nocturnal? Owl, said Heidi. Raise your hand, Heidi, said Mrs. Brisbane. But that is correct. An owl is nocturnal. Anyone else? A voice shouted out. My dad! Mrs. Brisbane looked around. Who said that? He did. AJ. Garth Tugwell pointed at AJ. Both boys sat at the table nearest my cage. What about your dad? Asked Mrs. Brisbane. AJ squirmed in his seat. Well, my mom always says my dad is nocturnal because he stays up so late watching TV. Stop giggling, Gail, and a few other students snickered. Mrs. Brisbane didn't crack a smile. Her use of the word is correct, she said, though technically humans are not nocturnal. Any others? Eventually, the class came up with more names of nocturnal animals, like bats and coyotes and possums, and Mrs. Brisbane said that the class would be learning more about animal habitats later in the year. If she'd just look at me, she could learn a lot, but I noticed for the rest of the day that Mrs. Brisbane stayed far away from my cage, as if I had a disease or something. She read a mighty fine story to us in the afternoon, though. In fact, I couldn't get back to my nap afterward. It was about a scary house with these scratching noises and a ghost. Thump, thump, thump. The ghost came down the hall. Oh, I had shivers and quivers. I have to say, Mrs. Brisbane knows how to read a story. Her voice changed and her eyes got wide, and I forgot about her gray hair and her dark suit. To squeak the truth, my fur was on end. The story had a funny ending because it turned out the ghost wasn't a ghost at all. It was an owl. At the end of the story, everybody laughed, even Mrs. Brisbane. I was beginning to think that life with this new teacher wouldn't be so bad, but I changed my mind when the bell rang at the end of the day and all my classmates raced out of the room, leaving me alone with her. She erased the chalkboard and gathered up her papers. I could tell that we'd be going home soon. Suddenly, I began to worry. What if Mrs. Brisbane lived in a scary house with spooky noises and a thumping ghost? Or even worse, what if Mrs. Brisbane had a scary pet, like a dog? I bet you that would make a hamster very afraid. My mind was racing as fast as I was spinning my wheel when she finally approached and looked down at me, frowning. "Well, you're on your own now," she said. With that, she closed the blinds and walked away. But I heard her mutter, "Wrote it," under her breath. She left the classroom and closed the door. She left me alone, all alone in room 26. I'd never been all alone before. Now, in my book, it's got this little wiggly line. You see that? And that means that there's a break in the chapter. It's not a big enough break to make a new chapter, but there's a scene change, or the setting of the story is changing, or it's a different problem that's not related to what we knew before. So that's what that means. It's not big enough to make a chapter, but it's enough to note. As the room slowly grew darker and quieter, I thought back to the happy times at Miss Mack's apartment. There were always cheery lights on and music and telephone talking. And oh dear, during the day I never noticed how the clock on the wall ticked off the seconds one by one very loudly. This time he is, because he's all alone. Tick, tick, tick. I was feeling sick, sick, sick. I wondered if there were any owls around room 26, or ghosts. I tried to pass the time by writing in my notebook about Petarama and my days in Miss Mack's apartment. Writing took my mind off my jittery nerves, but eventually my writing paw began to ache and I had to stop my scratchings. If only I could roam free, as I had in Miss Mack's apartment. Then I remembered the lock doesn't lock. It only took a few seconds to jiggle the door open. I skidded across the table. Then, grasping the top of the table leg tightly, I closed my eyes and slid to the ground. So it sounds like a pole, like a fireman's pole. Ah, freedom! I dashed along the shiny floor. I darted between the tables and chairs. I stopped to nibble a peanut underneath Stop Giggling Gail's chair. It tasted delicious and made the coolest crunching sound. I chewed and chomped and gnawed and nibbled. Oh, I love that sentence. Because he could have said he ate it, but he didn't. Instead, he said, I chewed and chomped and gnawed and nibbled. All those verbs in that long string makes me understand exactly how excited he was. And when I stopped, I heard the sound. Thump, thump, thump. Just like the story Miss Brisbane had read to us. Thump, thump, thump. Closer and closer down the hall, coming toward room 26. The rattle, scratch, thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, I longed for the protective cover of my cage. I dropped what was left of the peanut and scampered back. When I got to the table, I thought a terrible thought. I had slid down the smooth, shiny leg, straight down. But how was I going to climb up again? I flung myself against a table leg, grabbed on and pushed up, but I had only made a little progress when I began to slide down. I was coming right back where I'd started. The rattling got louder. The sounds weren't coming toward room 26 anymore. They were coming in room 26. Just then, I noticed a long cord running down from the blinds. Without hesitation, I leaped up and grabbed the cord and began swinging back and forth. My stomach churned, and I wished I'd never touched that peanut. But with each swing, I got a little higher off the ground. As soon as I saw the edge of the table, I closed my eyes and dived toward it. Whoosh! I slid across the table and scampered into the cage. As I pulled the door behind me, I was suddenly blinded by light. The something had turned on the lights and was clomping across the floor. It was huge and heavy and coming right towards me. Just then my eyes adjusted to the light and I saw the thing. It was a man! Well, who do we have here? A new student, a voice boomed. The man was smiling down at me. My, that was a lovely piece of fur across his upper lip. It's a mustache. A nice black mustache. He bent down to peer in at me. I'm Aldo Amato. And who are you? I'm Humphrey. Are you scared? And you scared me half to death, I told him, but as always, that all came out was squeak, squeak, squeak. Aldo squinted at the sign on my cage. Oh, you're Humphrey. Hope I didn't scare you half to death, he said with a laugh. I've just come to clean the room. So sorry. That'd be my son. I've just come to clean the room. I come every night. But where have you been? He said. He rolled up a big cart with a bucket and mops and brooms and all kinds of bottles and rags on it. Oh, that's right, he replied, as if we were having a real conversation. Mrs. Brisbane came back today. She's a good teacher, you know, Humphrey. Been teaching here a long time. Wish I had a good teacher like her. Say, do you like music, Humphrey? Hang on one second. Make sure my son, he's learning at home. Okay. Wish I had a good teacher like her. Hey, say, do you like music, Humphrey? Squeak, 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 I tried to tell him. I love music almost as much as I love Mrs. Mac. Suddenly, a song came blasting out of the radio on his cart, and he set to work. Sweeping, mopping, moving desks, dusting. But Aldo Amato didn't just dust and mop. He spun and swayed. He hopped and leaped. He twisted and twirled. How do you like the floor show? Aldo asked me as he grasped the mop like a dancer holding his partner. Get it? It's a floor show? 'Cause I'm cleaning the floor? Then Aldo roared the biggest roar of laughter I've ever heard. Ha, 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 ha. His big mustache shook so much I thought it might fall off. You like that? I'll show you real talent, Humphrey. Aldo Amato picked up his broom and very carefully stood it up with the very tip balancing on one outstretched fingertip. It wiggled from side to side, but Aldo moved the broom and managed to keep it balanced straight in the air for an amazingly long time. When he was finished, he bowed deeply and said, What do you think? I'm going to join the circus. And he roared again. Then Aldo wiped his forehead with a big bandana and sat down at the table where AJ usually sits. You know what, Humphrey? You're such good company. I think I'll take my dinner break with you. Do you mind? Please, 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 I squeaked. Aldo pulled his chair right up to my cage. Hey, you're a handsome guy, like me. Here, a little bit of green won't hurt you, will it? He tore off a piece of lettuce from his sandwich and pushed it through the bars. Of course, I hid it in my cheek pouch. Aldo chuckled. Good for you, Humphrey. Always save something for a rainy day. The two of us shared a very pleasant meal as Aldo told me about how he used to have a regular job where he worked during the day, but then his company closed down and he couldn't find a job for a long time. He couldn't even pay the rent when he was lucky enough to get hired here at Longfellow School. A rent is where you live in someone else's house and you pay them money to stay there. That's what rent means. And he couldn't afford to pay that at the time because his job, he lost his job. But he was glad to get the job, but it's lonely working at night because his friends work during the day. They can never get together like they used to. I tried to squeak to him all about the creatures, like me, that are also nocturnal, and Aldo listened. I know you're trying to tell me something, Humphrey, but I can't tell what it is. Maybe you're just saying, I'm not alone after all, huh? Squeak! He understood. Aldo stood up and threw his trash into the plastic bag on his cart. Well, I've got a lot of other rooms to clean, my friend, but I'll be back tomorrow night. Maybe I'll take my dinner break with you again. And Aldo pushed the cart toward the door and reached for the light switch. No, 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 I squeaked, dreading the thought of being plunged into the darkness again. Aldo stopped. I hate to leave you in the dark, but if I don't turn the lights off, I could lose my job. He clomped back across the floor to the window. Tell you what, I'll leave the blinds open a little. There's a nice light right outside your window. After he turned off the lights and left, I chomped on the lettuce I'd saved and basked in the warm glow of the streetlight and my new friendship with Aldo. He thought it was going to be the worst night ever, didn't he? And it didn't turn out to be that way at all. Tip 2, at the bottom of every chapter, the author includes tips for taking care of hamsters. Hamsters are not picky about their food and eat very little. Make sure to feed your pet a wide variety of great, tasty foods. Guide to the Care and Feeding of Hamsters by Dr. Harvey H. Hammer. Now, he thought it was going to be the worst ever, but then it turned right around for him, didn't he? Now, that doesn't mean that his hard days are over. But because I'm a thinker when I read, and I have to predict what's going to happen in the story so I can kind of keep understanding what's going on, I'm thinking to myself, because Humphrey can write, and I don't know, I've never read this book. I'm no further ahead in this story than you are. But I'm wondering maybe if he begins to use his writing, if we don't really know yet if he can write like real words or if it's just kind of scribble scrabble, but I wonder if he figures out a way to communicate with the people around him using his pencil and his tiny pad of paper. That's a prediction I'm making, but I don't know. I've never read it. But this book right here is like one of like 6 or 7 in the series. So obviously he learns to do some stuff because they've written so many books about it. So I hope you're enjoying this chapter book. I think it's quite adorable. And it reminds me of another chapter book. I have to remember the title of it. The Mouse and the Motorcycle. Because the mouse in that story is a lot like Humphrey. And he makes new friends along the way. Anyway, I hope that you have a great day, guys. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, friends.